Southern Colorado's Rock Alternative 97.7 The Academy. Conman broadcasting live and loud from the Air Force Academy. And, well, I tell you what, folks, this morning we've got an American test pilot and a NASA astronaut. Now, he graduated from the Academy back in 99. He got his master's degree at MIT right after that. Then went on to do some really cool things, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, Chari. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me out here. It's good to be here instead of 85 degrees in Houston. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, welcome back to the Academy. Obviously, when you roll in this campus, it's a different atmosphere. What comes to mind when you get back here?
It's much different than seeing it as a cadet. I think as a cadet, it brought back a very visceral experience when you drove onto the Academy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's sense of dread, but coming back, it was like all these random neurons in your brain firing of like, oh, man, I remember this. I remember that. Or I remember this person. So talking to the NCLS this morning, I kept seeing faces in the crowd. It was like, oh, yeah, it's like all these, like I actually broke my thought a few times. Like, oh,
hey, but it's got to be just like it was yesterday. I mean, you've had a couple of lifetimes since you've been here.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how fast life goes. And I think talking to the cadets, it's so. I think I get so much energy talking to them. It's like, man, the possibilities in front of you are just amazing. It's so envious.
And sometimes you kind of wonder, do they realize what's ahead of them? I mean, some of them they got tunnel vision. They just want to get out of here.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely didn't when I was in their shoes. And that's one of the things I keep telling is like, hey, whatever you think you know, you're just scraping the surface.
When you came to the Academy originally, was NASA always your focus?
So I think as a really young kid, my mom has pictures of me, as a kindergartner dressing up as an astronaut. I think at some point I sort of thought like flying was, I think I undersold myself, if you will. Like there's like, well, I can definitely fly. If I get to space, that's probably a bit of a pipe dream, but I was really, really interested in flying. And it honestly wasn't until test pilot school that it kind of re-dawned on me. I was like, this is actually like really a thing I could do. So all through the Academy, I was doing stuff that was space related, just because I was really into space. So I was pretty heavy astro geek. But I don't think, I think it would have been, I would have told you like, oh yeah, it'd be great if I could be an astronaut, but I really wanted to fly and I really want to do stuff engineering-wise related to space.
Yeah, it's cool how you merged all those things: engineering, space, mathematics, and I mean, it really works together. What a repertoire! What are some of the things that you learned really when you were here as a cadet that you apply today?
So I think we got a chance to talk to some of the cadets today in between NCLS sessions. I think what strikes me now, like talking with them and reliving that experience, is some of the things are prioritization. And so the Academy, you can't do all the things all the time at 100%. You have to figure out like what needs my priority right now and what do I have to kind of let slide. And so that's a skill set I think I definitely learned at the Academy and has served me the rest of my life. I think the other thing is, calling it having a thick skin or divorcing yourself from like the personal versus the professional criticism. That's something we learn here, and compartmentalizing is another word. But the idea of like, especially as a freshman, there's a lot of, I would say, feedback.
Sure.
that you're getting from
good or bad.
Classmen.
Yeah.
And so learning to, take the good, take the bad as well, and know like what parts of that you should take to heart and what is just like, okay, that's not helping me. And it's very applicable to what we do in the Air Force and the NASA. Of like we have hard training events, and you make mistakes, and you have to be very honest about that and learn to move on. And I think the other thing that didn't strike me until a few months ago, I was talking to some Academy folks, is we do a lot at the Air Force Academy, which you don't associate with like West Point, Annapolis, Air Force Academy. Like people, I think, associate it stereotypically as like very, very hierarchical because it goes to what we associate with hierarchical organizations. But at the Academy, like you're switching jobs every few months. And so sometimes you're in charge of people and then you're working with those people. And then the next semester they're in charge of you. And so you get really used to these flat, fluid organizations, which is really helpful in the actual real world.
Sure.
And it's a skill set that you really get to practice, being a leader one day, a follower the next. And I think those three things are what I think I don't think they were formative in my life. And that's a big part of why I'm where I'm at.
And such at a young age, when your brain is still forming in the front, for crying out loud, and I mean, those are the things that are instilled in your true foundation,
exactly,
and it's wonderful to hear that somebody like yourself that has absolutely hit the top shelf still uses a lot of those things today.
Oh, yeah.
I was watching an interview with you here recently, and you had talked about one of the last trips you took. You went up there with your class ring. Now, you went up with other class rings, and they melt those down?
I took my class ring, and then so my class ring had elements of gold that had been flown on a shuttle mission. And so I contacted the AOG prior to flying, and they sent me basically a gold ingot to fly with me to then melt down. I'm guessing maybe the 24 class of 24s rings. I'm not sure where they're going to get put in. But yeah, so I flew that up with me. And then got a chance to talk to the Academy cadets, and also flew one each patch from all the squadrons here.
Oh, it's so cool,
Kind of cool to get to talk to the cadets and have all their patches floating around in a giant Ziploc bag.
It was always so cool to see you give shout-outs to USAFA, you know. We were talking about the fact that, you were really interested in flying initially. When you graduated the Academy, you went on to be a test pilot, which I just think is the coolest because some of the greatest astronauts that we've ever had started off as test pilots. Favorite aircraft?
So it depends. If no one's shooting at me, the F-15E was my first and favorite.
Okay.
If someone's shooting back, the F-35.
Okay. I mean, weren't you on the ground floor with the 35?
We were, yeah. So I was lucky enough to be out at Edwards doing the testing when the Air Force declared we were basically got the Air Force to IOC, your initial operational capability. So it was a test pilot's dream job. Getting to do developmental tests on the newest and greatest fighter. So that was awesome.
Man. We've all seen Top Gun. And, they have the coolest flight names. But that's not really the case, is it? I mean, everybody has their own call sign, but you don't get to pick it.
No, you definitely don't get to pick it. Oh, you could try to pick it. That usually ends badly.
Yeah, so your call sign was Grinder.
It is, yep. Still
Why?
Is. Oh, man, you're putting me on the spot. Because I work really hard. How about that?
Okay, well, that's good. That's great, man. We were talking to General Clark, and his is Harpo, which is Oprah spelled backwards, and that's her production company. And he was on Oprah one time, and his team never let him forget it. So it was Harpo from then on out. Would you, with all the flight stuff, I mean, truly going Mach 1 with your hair on fire, would you consider yourself an adrenaline junkie?
Definitely not. In fact, actually, I think one misconception in the test world is that we're hair on fire, but actually that's a good test sortie is a quiet test sortie. You don't want to be surprised. So same in space, we train a lot for the bad day, but a good mission is when you've actually kind of prepared and you've modeled everything and it's like, yep, this went exactly like we thought it would go.
Yeah.
Granted, we spend a lot of time simming and preparing for the opposite, but we kind of really hope it doesn't happen.
Sure. So no motorcycles, no jumping at airplanes just for kicks?
I drive an 07 car.
That's awesome,
with a booster seat and a car seat in the back.
That's fantastic. I had Nick Haig in here, asked him basically the same question, and he answered it the same way, because it's so surprising to me. You guys fly faster than anything, and, you're very conservative about the way that you do it. Like you said, a quiet sortie is a great sortie.
Yeah, well, so the other adage I've heard, it's not mine, but there's old pilots and bold pilots, but no old, bold pilots.
I'm going to use that one, too. When you got selected for the NASA, was it Group 20?
Group 22, Class 22.
22,
yep.
Okay.
2017, yep.
So then, you spent 2 years in basic astronaut training.
It's like basic training, but no one's yelling at you.
Okay, so I was going to ask you,
what's nicer?
What's the difference between, the astronaut basic training and, say, your cadet basic training here?
So I think the biggest difference is NASA does a whole lot of front-loaded effort on the selection process, so it runs about 18 months before you even start training. And so the investment they've put into that, they are very heavily wanting you to succeed, whereas I think the military training flows, there is a higher washout rate.
Sure.
So that's the biggest difference. So at NASA, they're expecting failure along the way, but it's not like a threat looming over you. Like, oh man, if I fail this run, I'm on the way out. It's more like, okay, now ask for help and we'll get you the help. But but they definitely wean a whole lot of people in the selection process. But once they finally make the selection, they're very invested in keeping you in.
So I remember watching the TV when you were selected for the Artemis team. Right? And that was in 2020.
Right.
And immediately they started talking about the Artemis team was going to Mars. Forget about, the step to the moon. They've already been talking about the fact that your class could possibly be the class to go to Mars, right?
It would be, we're probably on the old end of it, but it's possible. Okay. Yeah, we'd have to move fast. Definitely, pretty much everyone in the astronaut corps right now is helping with Artemis development, so getting us back to the moon to stay, and then using that as a test bed to get to Mars. So all of us are right in the mix of being involved on whether it's the rocket, the capsule, the lander, the Lunar Gateway, which is the lunar space station. There's no shortage of technical problems being worked to get us to Mars eventually.
I mean, what a huge program. Now, the fact that, we stopped the lunar thought, I mean, back in 1970, right? I mean, was Apollo 13 was the last time?
Well, Apollo 17 was the last time we landed. Yep. So Apollo 13 was the famous, didn't land on the moon, and then had the next landed on 17. And the original plan was to continue and work our way towards Mars, and with budget cuts and other priorities, basically that got turned off. So yeah, and the big change now is to go back to stay. So and try to build a presence, learn how to live on another surface, learn how to live on another planet, and then use that to get us to Mars. Yeah,
an absolute stepping stone.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the idea of the Artemis program is to continue civilization.
Exactly. Yep.
Outside of our world.
Exactly. Yeah, and to make the moon accessible for not just like now low Earth orbit's accessible for private companies. We want to get there eventually with the moon and make that accessible for other countries. The Artemis Coalition, it's not just the United States, it's a whole coalition of countries.
Yeah.
To get companies out there, make it a business case for going there, and then let us then proceed on to Mars.
Because the shuttle program, I mean, it was low orbit, right? I mean, we didn't get very far out there for any reason. Did some experiments, came back. That was about it.
Exactly. So Artemis 1, which just came back a few months ago, that was the farthest we've had a human-rated vehicle go ever. I mean, that went farther than the Apollo missions. Now, granted, there's no people on it, but Artemis 2 will take people farther than we've ever gone.
It's so exciting.
Yeah, it is an awesome time to be in space industry.
Oh, man. I mean, how incredibly exciting. And something that I thought was really interesting was the name Artemis. Explain the Greek goddess Artemis.
So Artemis is Apollo's twin sister, and so very appropriate since one of the goals. I mean, 50 years ago with the Apollo generation, we had a much different office, terms of the people in the office and just the where we were as a nation. And I think we're much more inclusive, and it's not inclusivity for the sake of it, but actually recognizing the power of the diversity. And so Artemis being the twin sister of Apollo, and one of the goals of the Artemis program is to land the first woman on the surface of the moon. So that was a little kind of a clever naming, but also just an homage to the Apollo program, but looking forward to the future too.
I just thought it was a brilliant naming scheme for sure, all the way around. You're the first astronaut out of Group 22 to command a flight. I mean, what an honor that was, huh?
Yeah, it was. I was definitely not expecting that, but it was super fun. I had the benefit of Tom Marshburn was my pilot on board. He's flown 2 other missions before, so having his experience, and then Kayla was my classmate. So it was an amazing time. And then Matthias was a German astronaut. We had a blast. I would go back in a heartbeat.
Yeah, but you're a rookie. They just don't hand that to rookies. I mean, they hadn't done it in 48 years until you got a hold of it, right?
True, but I think it's really a testament to the training program.
Sure.
We've made a lot of progress. Actually, thanks to a lot of looking at the Air Force, how the Air Force does pilot training. We've incorporated a lot of that into our training for spacewalks and getting ready to fly. And so I think we've got a lot more confidence in having rookies do that. So Nicole Mann, who's up there right now with Crew 5, she was also a rookie commander. Jasmine Mogbelli was in my class. She's going to be a rookie commander. So we've definitely set the bit and hey, we've proven this works, and think we're off to the races now.
So, we had talked about the fact that there was a bit of a lag in the Apollo program, and a lot of it had to do with funding. Here we are now, NASA working with private companies like SpaceX. Is the whole point of that the funding, the private funding that comes in, or why are we working with Elon Musk?
So I think it's not so much the funding. So we're still, don't make no mistake, we're still paying them to do that. The big difference is that the way we're doing the requirements, we're trying to let industry innovate more. So a more traditional approach would be like, we want to buy this thing. But what we're now trying to do is say, we want to buy a service. We want other industries to be able to go to the moon. We just want you to build this thing, and then we'll pay to use it. Same thing in low Earth orbit. We want there to be commercial space stations, and then we will pay to use that space on that space station to do experiments, but we would rather not pay and own the entire space station and run it all. We want to be more in the market of buying the service and let industry innovate, and it really creates the industry. But NASA's charter, really, at the end of the day, is to enable U.S. industry to do these things. We take the technological challenges and the development risks that companies maybe can't take, but we'll do that and then open up the the market to them.
Okay. It just seemed like it took forever to make that happen. And everybody's excited about the space program again, which is super cool,
It turns out space is still hard.
Right. So you've gone up now 2 different times, 66 and 67 expeditions, right?
Yep. Yeah, so those overlap. So it's one continuous stay. So 66, so 107, basically 6 months on orbit, mostly expedition 66 and then 67. So 2 expeditions, but 1 up trip and 1 down trip.
Okay. Yeah. It's plenty of time. There's no doubt about it. Explain what an EVA is.
So an EVA stands for extravehicular activity, which is basically the acronym for a spacewalk.
Yeah.
And so that's by far the most mentally and physically demanding part of both the training and the flight, but also the most rewarding thing. And so we use that. Think of the space station as your house. And so if something breaks on the outside of your house, you got to go outside and fix it. And so we try to fix as much as we can using the robotic arm, but there's certain things we just can't fix other than sending people outside. So that's why we train to do it.
Well, when I watch it on movies and when I watch it on TV, everything looks quiet and calm. But I was talking with Nick Hague, and he's like, man, you get out there and there's space debris that's ripping holes through equipment. And, it's treacherous. And like you said, it was one of the most challenging physically and mentally of all the tasks.
Yeah, I think physically it's metabolically like running a marathon, and then it feels like you were in a fight afterwards. So because there's basically 4 pounds of pressure on every square inch of your body, which 4 pounds seems like that's really light, but multiply that by your entire body surface, it hurts. So it is physically draining, and then mentally, there's a whole ground team watching for whether space debris or like looking at the solar angles and all the touch temperature. So when you go every 90 minutes, you're going around the Earth. So every 45 minutes, you're going from sunrise to sunset, and so something may be 400 degrees hot, in the sun, and then 20 minutes later, it's minus 200 degrees. So thinking about the suit having to do that, what you're touching, what you're moving, like everything, like just the mental calculus that goes through it. It looks, when you watch it, you're like, oh, like they're floating around, like super fun. Like I want to go float too.
Right. Not at all.
But at the moment, it's the same analogy I use when I describe flying a fighter. Like I think people think like, oh, they're like just out there like la la la, like looking around, but it's actually so scripted. Even on test missions, like every minute is just like, okay, doing this, then that, then this, and so it's not until on the way home on a flight where you're like, wow, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Looking around outside, and the same thing on a spacewalk. It was like, go, 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 go. And then it wasn't until, at one moment I was on this structure and I had some time while Kayla was installing something. I had some time to just look around and be like, hey, there's the Earth.
Let's snap a selfie.
This is pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine. But of course, if somebody notices something bad coming your way, you can't just jump back in. It's quite a process to get back in the airlock and come back in.
But we actually leverage Space Force and Air Force. They work closely with NASA. So they're watching that before we even go out the door on an EVA. They've looked at the trajectory analysis and the orbits to make sure there's nothing, we call it conjunction, something hitting the space station. But yes, you're absolutely right. That's why we take all those precautions, because if you're out there, it's not easy to, it's not quick to get back in.
Right, right, not at all. How has the war in Ukraine changed things for the American space program?
Honestly,
if at all.
Well, I think it's the only place that we still have great cooperation. Like, so when we were up there when the invasion happened, and on a day-to-day operational basis, our relationship with the cosmonauts wasn't changed, because we were just up there getting the job done. And I think obviously we recognize the seriousness of the situation and we're very sensitive to that. But just getting our day jobs done, it was not really a factor. We just didn't really talk about it. I think for our families, it was definitely an impact, because it's hard for them to see stuff in the news and statements coming out, and then trying to rectify that, reconcile it with like how we're doing. But MCC Moscow and MCC Houston, which are the 2 mission control centers, didn't miss a beat. Everything, and still to this day, continues to work. And I think one of the cool things about the space cooperation, I think, hopefully when this conflict comes to a resolution, I think the space connection will be where we rebuild our relations, because that's the one place we still cooperate and do it really effectively. Because
I remember seeing on the news them saying like, well, the Russians are now not going to send a rocket up to get anybody, and little things like that. But any time that I've ever heard about the Russian cosmonauts, these guys are scientists. They're not diplomats. They're seeing the bigger picture here. So
yeah, absolutely.
I was confused.
On a personal basis, there was never a question, and to that thing, like, yeah, and that's why I was talking about, like, the families are seeing one message, but then working with them, like, yeah, obviously we're still on the same team. We're gonna be safe. We're all going to execute the mission as we originally planned. So that was never a question. But yeah, there's oftentimes in diplomacy, there's statements made for the sake of making statements versus what the actual reality on the ground, or in this case in space, are, which to us was pretty much keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm hanging out here with astronaut and former Academy grad Raja Chari. And Raja, I couldn't wait to talk to you about some of this stuff, but now we're going to loosen up a little bit. We're going to do a little thing I call this or that. All right. You tell me, what do you prefer? Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Star Wars. When were you born?
I was born in 1977, so actually right when it kicked off. I watched a lot of Star Trek, so I'm familiar, but I would go Star Wars.
Man, I remember standing in line in 1977 for hours on end to go and see it over and over again. Loved it. So you and I are on the same page there. Liftoff or re-entry?
Re-entry.
Really?
Easy, super easy.
Just because
so liftoff,
it's over?
I think it's almost, I always hesitate to tell people because liftoff is kind of anticlimactic, and not that it's not cool, but it's more because we've simmed it so much that it feels you almost, it's actually Kayla's analogy, like that you could get there to get to orbit, and then it wouldn't be surprising to have someone open the hatch and be like, all right, come on out, let's talk about the sim, because it's so real, exactly what you planned and your condition, so you're still in good shape. And so, although you're pulling G's, you've done that in the centrifuge, so everything feels like, oh, this is like what we did and we trained. Okay, this is all normal. I mean, they even play in the sims before we launch, like the month prior. The sims you're doing, it's the same people. It's like you're literally the exact same people saying the same things on the loop, so their voices sound the same. Like that, they play sounds into the capsule that like sound like the rocket. Yeah, and so the real day you're kind of like,
this is just like it.
I think this is happening. I think the one sensation that they don't simulate is if it's like the analogy I use is like it's the closest I can come to describing it, like when you're in an elevator in a tall building and you can feel you're like you're going up fast. That I wasn't expecting, but you could tell like we are going somewhere. Yeah. We're going somewhere fast. Like you could feel that. But re-entry, best ride of my life.
Really?
So one of the downsides of having a fighter background is I can't get no joy from like amusement parks, and so I could ride with my kids and they're like screaming. I'm like,
this is nothing.
This is pretty lame, right? But so re-entry was the first time in a long time. I was like, holy wow, like that was awesome.
Oh man, that's so cool.
I have no idea what happened because your inner ear and your vestibular system are so out of whack, and so in reality, the capsule is just doing these little attitude corrections, but each of those corrections, because your brain's trying to reprocess that, feels like someone just got you by the ankle, like flinging you around, and exactly. You're like, I don't know which way. You feel like you're just tumbling in like a washing machine. I would do that again in a heartbeat. That was fun.
Oh wow. Okay, sleeping on a pillow top mattress or sleeping in zero gravity.
Oh, zero gravity, easy.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks so weird, man. You're like mummified.
The best sleep of your life.
Really?
Because there's no pressure points on you anywhere. It does take about 2 or 3 days to adjust. And so I'm sure you've had this sensation where you start to fall asleep and like your hand moves or like maybe falls off the corner of the bed and you pop awake because you feel like you're falling. So the same thing happens in space because you are falling. And so when you close your eyes, you immediately snap awake because you feel like you're falling, and then you close and you can't fall asleep. So we actually use Ambien initially to help with that transition. But after that, it's amazing because there's no, like your clothes aren't actually on you, they're floating on you. And you're in the sleeping bag, but you're just floating it. So there's no pressure points. There's no, it's the best sleep of your life. I bet. And so then when you come back and you lay down in a bed the first time, it's like, ouch. Why is all this pushing into my back and legs? It takes a few days to readjust to how do I sleep.
Man, I can't imagine. I'm a side sleeper as it is, and last night I'm rolling around going, man, I wonder what it's like to sleep in outer space.
It's awesome.
Oh man. So the last couple I've got for you here are music questions.
Okay.
We kind of touched on a little bit of music before we started, so you just tell me, which do you prefer? Rocket Man by Elton John or Space Oddity by David Bowie?
I'd go Rocket Man.
Okay. Space Cowboy by Steve Miller or Walking on the Moon by The Police?
Space Cowboy.
Well done. Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys or Rocket by Def Leppard?
Simply because it's the Beastie Boys.
Attaboy. Cool. Okay. Last one. Man on the Moon by R.E.M. or Fly Me to the Moon by Sinatra?
A classic versus I'd go Man on the Moon by REM just because that's kind of like brings me back to like high school versus, but the Sinatra version's like that's the classic. That's a hard one to top. It is a general. I'd split on that one.
Man, and I could just see, like floating in outer space with Sinatra playing in the background.
It's very peaceful. That's like it's a very peaceful image. Yeah, I think I would depend on the mood I'm in. How about that?
Yeah, there you go. And last thing I wanted to bring up is that I had heard in January you've been nominated for Brigadier General.
This is true. Yeah, so waiting on Senate confirmation, but yes, that's a true statement.
Congratulations, my man.
Much, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was very, very not expecting that.
Yeah.
But very humbled to get to continue to serve. And very
wow.
excited.
So where do you go from here?
I keep working NASA, and so you're talking Artemis, so that's what I'm deep into the human, we call it HLS, the Human Landing System, which is the lunar lander. So SpaceX is on contract for building one, and then we're in the middle of a source selection to pick another contractor. So we are like
you're in it to win it.
We're deep into it. It is a good thing. So we've got the Orion capsule, we got that working. We got the SLS, which is the rocket. We just need a lander. And so we're getting there.
Man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today.
Oh, no problem. Happy to do
so much fun. Colonel Raja Chari, everybody. Thank you, sir. Look forward to the next time you're back through. Please come in. We'd love to do another interview with you, or whenever you're back in the Springs. I'd love to see you.
Well, thanks, Chris. And thanks, 97.7. Appreciate what you guys are doing here. And this is awesome. It's great to be back at the Academy and back in Colorado Springs.
Man, anytime you're back, swing on through.
Will do.
Raja Chari, everybody, as we wrap it up and get back into the music right here on 97.7, The Academy.